Two drug dealers have been jailed for a total of more than 16 years after being concerned in the supply of £310,000 of cocaine on EncroChat. John Gates and Andrew Brearley, who were also involved in 4 kilograms of cannabis grows, had been using the encrypted communications platform to deal 7.75 kilograms of the Class A drug on Tyneside. The court heard that while 2.25 kilograms of cocaine was returned because it was too poor in quality, the remaining 5.5 was sold to users for a total of £200,000. Prosecutors heard that Mr. Gates had a leading role in the criminal enterprise by sourcing the drugs from upstream suppliers, while Mr. Brearley acted as his trusted lieutenant by dishing them out and taking payments. However, the pair's secret scheme came to light when the French police managed to intercept EncroChat in 2020, and their details were given to Northumbria police. Now, Mr. Gates, who was 34 of Green Hills in Killingsworth, has been locked up for 9 years and 7 months, and Mr. Brearley, 31 of Allendale Road in Walker, has been jailed for 86 months after both men pleaded guilty to conspiracy to supply cocaine and conspiracy to supply cannabis. Mr. Brearley also pleaded guilty to a further charge of being concerned in the supply of a Class B drug. Newcastle Crown Court heard that EncroChat is a subscription-paid service providing a fully encrypted communications platform, which users have used to purchase mobile phones in order to access. As a result of an investigation by French police in 2020, the EncroChat system was exposed, resulting in Mr. Gates and Mr. Brearley's illegal scheme also being unearthed. Paul Cross, prosecuting, said Mr. Gates had the username No Dramas and Mr. Brearley went by the name Normalhead, and the pair were involved in the dealing of cocaine in Tyneside, Gates between December 2019 and May 2020, Mr. Brearley between March and June 2020. Mr. Cross added, "The prosecution say that this conspiracy was plainly already running when this data became available." Mr. Cross said that there were numerous messages and calls found concerning the supply of cocaine and evidence of cannabis growth and supply. He continued, "There was evidence that Mr. Gates employed Mr. Brearley. Mr. Gates didn't have possession of the actual drugs, but used Mr. Brearley for that. Mr. Brearley also accounted for the money." The court was told that Mr. Gates sourced the cocaine from an upstream supplier and used Mr. Brearley to take possession of it and sell it on to users. In total, he had dealings with 7.75 kilograms of cocaine, worth £40,000 per kilogram, but 2.25 kilograms was sent back because it was of poor quality. The pair were also concerned with 4 kilograms of cannabis grows, worth £18,000, Mr. Cross said. When arrested, Mr. Gates tried to smash one of his mobile phones, while neither of the duo's EncroChat mobiles were recovered. Police, during an interview, said that Mr. Gates remained silent, while Mr. Brearley denied any knowledge of drug dealing. Oliver Kirk, defending Mr. Gates, who had 31 offences on his record, including 8 relating to drug possession and supply, said there were others higher up in the chain. Mr. Kirk continued, "Mr. Gates acted as a middleman. The reality is, Mr. Gates was a local supplier, and although there is an indicative suggestion of a leading role, there is no evidence of substantial financial advantage or close links to the original source." Mr. Kirk said Mr. Gates had become involved in the conspiracy as a result of being in debt. Jonathan Rosen, defending Mr. Brearley, who has one unrelated past conviction, told the court that he had also become involved in the scheme because of debt. Mr. Rosen added, "His father is extremely ill. Mr. Brearley knows that today, having come to court on bail, is probably the last time he's going to have a face-to-face contact with his father. It's unlikely he'll be able to visit his son in prison." Sentencing the pair, recorder Mark Giuliani said, "You, Mr. Gates, can be classified as having a leading role. You were directing the organising and selling of drugs on a commercial scale through your trusted lieutenant, Mr. Brearley. You had contact with the upstream suppliers and you were able to obtain credit. You were given directions that you wanted the drugs to be Colombian. You gave instructions for an upstream supplier to contact Mr. Brearley directly." Recorder Mr. Giuliani said, "You, Mr. Brearley, can be correctly classified as having a significant role. Did have an operational function within the chain and an understanding of the scale of the operation." Speaking after the sentencing, Northumbria Police Detective Chief Inspector Mark Michael praised the continued work of his team. He said, "We have made incredible strides over the past few years through our continued activities as part of Operation Sentinel. Today's results are just another example of what the dedication and effort can achieve, as we now have 2 members of an organised criminal group behind bars. Mr. Brearley and Mr. Gates were observed over a period of time carrying out illegal business activities in plain sight, using their encrypted devices to buy and source cocaine and a variety of other items like cannabis and MDMA to sell for profit. Their brazen and shameless behaviour has now landed them behind bars and their criminal cash and drugs seized. We will work to continue to dismantle and disrupt organised criminality because it has no place here in Northumbria. Illegal drugs harm our communities by exploiting and manipulating those who are most vulnerable, and we know the profits of their sales never benefit the neighbourhoods they are sold in. They are funneled back into more serious crime. I'd like to thank the team of officers and staff who helped us secure these convictions. Thanks to their hard work, this pair had no choice but to admit their guilt in court, and I am pleased they have been dealt with." Drunken Lau has finally been locked up after she assaulted a police officer for the 10th time. Ashley George, also known as Wilson, was on 2 suspended sentences for lashing out at constables when she failed to keep her intoxicated temper in check once more. On this occasion, the 32-year-old kicked an officer as she was getting arrested for breaching the peace, hitting her shin, a court was told. The thug of Allendale Court in West Denton previously pleaded guilty to assaulting an emergency worker, and her case was adjourned for a pre-sentence report. However, on Tuesday, District Judge Paul Curran told her that she'd reached the end of the line with her chances to keep freedom, jailing her for 26 weeks. The judge said, "You have assaulted police officers 9 times in the past and on 6 occasions in the last year alone. In relation to each, you were told how serious it was, and you were told you would go to prison if you committed any further offences. Unfortunately, you became involved with the police again, and you were drunk at the time and you lashed out after losing your temper. Unfortunately, you have reached the end of the line." Newcastle Magistrate Court heard that Miss George was on 2 suspended sentences for assaulting police officers when she was arrested for breaching the peace at her accommodation on the 21st of April this year. A constable who had attended the scene but was not involved in detaining Miss George was watching as she was transported to a van. Paul Clark, prosecuting, added, "As the defendant approached the officer, she raised her right leg and kicked the officer in the shin. She was further arrested for assaulting an emergency worker." Alala Winscraft, defending, said, "Miss George had problems with alcohol and drugs, and she was vulnerable to exploitation from others. She accepts that she recklessly kicked out and it struck the officer. She's 32 years old and made full admissions when interviewed and apologised. Miss George lost her temper and had to be detained and escorted from the dock to the cells by 8 security workers." When she was told she was getting locked up. A Heaton teen robber left taxi driver praying for his life after a ferocious attack. Christopher Tams of Heaton has been jailed for robbery and racially aggravated criminal damage. A taxi driver was subjected to a ferocious and terrifying robbery during which he was punched, kicked and throttled and racially abused. Christopher Tams was already on a community order for supplying drugs when he targeted a cabbie who picked him up with a friend in Newcastle. Despite being told to take what he wanted by the frightened driver, Mr. Tams rained down the punches and kicks and shouted vile racist insults and left him fearing death as he throttled him from behind. A court heard that Mr. Tams told the driver, "Prayed during the onslaught, no one's going to save you now, and you're gonna die." Newcastle Crown Court heard the taxi driver was asked to pick up customers from the Metropolitan pub in Newcastle at around 5:30 p.m. on December the 18th last year, and Mr. Tams was one of the 2 men who got in. During a trip to the hostel where they were living, the cabbie felt intimidated by them. When they got to the hostel, Mr. Tams asked the driver to wait, but then came out and said he didn't need the taxi anymore, and asked for the £10 which had been paid at the start of the journey to be handed back, but was told the fare had already reached £8. Omar Ahmed, prosecuting, said the defendant became hostile and the driver was frightened and so returned the money. The defendant then proceeded to punch him in the face and demanded he hand over his takings for the evening. He handed over £40 and the defendant punched him again. He then got in the passenger seat and punched him again in the face before getting out the car, opening the driver's door and kicking him several times in the stomach. Mr. Tams then got in the back of the car, shouting vile racist abuse and punched a plastic screen, causing damage. Mr. Ahmed said he then grabbed him round the neck and pinned him to the side. He couldn't breathe. The victim tried to drive a short distance, hoping he would get away from Mr. Tams, but he then punched the car key, breaking it. Cabby then ran from the car to seek help. He was left with a cut lip, bruising to his eye and a suspected broken rib. The car was later found with liquid on the bonnet, with a rag hanging out the fuel tank, but the prosecutors could not prove who did that. The taxi driver said in a victim impact statement, "The impact has affected every aspect of my life and I still feel very scared and keep getting flashbacks. I've been traumatized and I'm not sleeping well because I have nightmares. I honestly thought I was going to die when he said he was strangling me with the seatbelt. Prayed to Allah to save me and he said no one's going to save you now, you're going to die." He added that he was unable to work full time or help his wife with 3 children as a consequence of what had happened to him. I would like the court to ask Christopher Tams why he attacked me when I told him to take everything he wanted and not physically assault me. Mr. Tams, who was 19 of Simonside Terrace, Heaton, Newcastle, has 9 previous convictions and he was on a community order imposed last November for supplying Class A drugs at the time. He was caught in a crackdown after students had died, but there was no suggestion he had sold any of the drugs that caused that death. He pleaded guilty to robbery and racially aggravated criminal damage and was jailed for 3 years. Recorder Brian Whitehead told him, "It involved quite ferocious violence, punching, kicking and shouting racial abuse, and then getting in the back and grabbing him round the neck so he couldn't breathe." Jane Foley, defending, said he had a troubled upbringing, had spent time in care, and added he remembers very little about the events from which we are concerned. He is a vulnerable young man with a history of mental health problems associated with a complex childhood trauma. Mr. Tams himself added, "I'm horrified in myself and I want to apologise to the court and to the victim."